Okay. Now we're good.
All right, so the town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, is currently following the guidance from the Lunenburg Board of Health, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to stop the spread. And all town facilities are, oh no, that's not true. In accordance with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, some public meetings are being conducted remotely. This is one of the meetings that's a hybrid. If you'd like to join in, you're welcome to join in. The link to join in is a Zoom link at the top of the agenda, and it's highlighted and it's labeled a meeting link. This is the July 22nd, Monday, 2024 meeting of the Budget Task Force. And anything else we need to do for call to order?
I
All right.
think we're all set.
Are there any public comments to open in response to last week's meeting? Anybody see any public comments? Is there somebody at the library jumping up and down, holding their hand in the air? All right. So then let's move to old business. The first thing on the agenda is comparable towns and school districts. So what might be the most helpful thing to do is to have Heather and then Dr. Burnham go in turn and walk us through the comps and the key statistics related to those comps. And if there are any comps on the list, and I looked through the list that Heather posted that are especially similar or dissimilar, it would be helpful to note. And I think Heather did that on the list, especially when comparing us to other police departments. So Heather, do you want to start with the comps for the town?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I put together, I had a Word document and Excel file. The Word document just outlines comps for each of our units. So for our municipal employees, also called clerical bargaining unit, we use Air, Groton, Leicester, Littleton, Rutland, Townsend, West Boylston, and Westminster. We also use internal comps against our salary administration plan employees, as a lot of those positions in the clerical bargaining unit are also in the salary administration plan, as they're non-benefited in the salary administration plan. The DPW, we use comps from Ashburnham, Air, Boxborough, Groton, Littleton, Pepperell, Templeton, and Westminster and Winchendon. There's some overlap with communities there. Police, we used Ashburnham, Air, Boxborough. Fitchburg was provided by the union, but we identified them as a non-comparable community. Groton, Littleton, Pepperell, Shirley, Sterling, Townsend, West Boylston, Westminster, and Winchendon. And for fire, we used Ashburnham, Air, Groton, Pepperell, Rutland, Sterling, Townsend, Westminster, Winchendon. And for the non-union salary administration plan, those were done this past year, the same communities as the clerical bargaining unit. The Excel file that I put together was all just information based from DLS. So some information to digest there. It's kind of scattered results if you look at the different tabs. Just give some information on tax levy, override, assessed values, population, those demographic type of information. Wow. Anyone have any questions?
So I did a list totally independent. And I came up somewhere in common, but I have a lot of different ones. I don't know. I can go through what I did. If you want.
Yeah,
I don't know what the right way to do this is.
I was just preventing what historically we've used for comps. So if there's comps that maybe the committee thinks is more apples to apples comparison, for Lunenburg. Those are the ones that we've historically used.
So Tony, do you want me to walk through? I came up
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah. Be
17.
great.
Evan, you might have already done this too in some. I think you started it actually last meeting.
I did,
Um,
and then I handed my work computer in, and I have a whole new work computer, and I don't have it anymore. So
Oh.
this is good that you did this.
Oh, sorry.
You want me to screen share
The first slide, the PowerPoint, the first slide. Or else I can, I don't know if I can screen share.
is it the one?
Yep. Okay. So this is using the community comparison report on DLS. So the first cut was I did a population between 10,000 and 15,000. And some of this data is kind of old, like it only goes up to 2022. So that gave me 45 towns. Oh, and that population was actually 2021, I guess. Then I looked at the DOR income per capita, and I limited it, constrained it to twofold within, so twofold above or twofold less than Lunenburg's value. And then use the EQV per capita, same thing, within twofold, population density within twofold. And then they had school structure, so some don't have, some have no data. I kept those in, but some had K-4, K-6, or K-8, so I eliminated those. I was just trying to get down to less than 20. So I just kept putting these constraints in. And then I used the total road miles and land area within twofold of Lunenburg, because I figured roads take money, a lot of maintenance, whatever. So, but those are kind of old, that's 2018 numbers. So anyway, oh, the last cut was towns in same or nearby counties. So I eliminated ones in Bristol, Essex, Norfolk, and Plymouth counties, because they're just too different, I think. So I ended up with the list you see there of 17 towns. Air didn't show up, Boxborough didn't show up. I forget some of the other ones. Winchendon, Westminster. So I don't know. And the rest of the slides, I reproduced using that set. I reproduced some of the graphs that were in the Westford report.
Was there commercial base versus residential on those?
I think it's in
Like
one
I'm
of
looking
these.
at some of those in the list. They're mill towns. They have a lot of some of them have little commercial.
Yeah, there
base.
is. One of these has. I thought I had. Residential and commercial is just Lunenburg and growth, but I thought there was something else with commercial. There's so many reports, like pre-populated reports in DLS, it's
Mhm.
kind of,
Overwhelming.
yeah. So I may not have picked the best report. Average single home value. No, I don't have. That report doesn't have.
Be
But wait, my
interested in
Excel
that as a
sheet.
filter.
Yeah. Hold on, how do I get out of this?
I mean, Millbury, just, I mean, that's further than Millbury, it's very different than.
I've never been, so
Okay.
I'm totally blind, yeah. Let me see. I think it's because I have another report that has a lot more detail that I used to make the. Where would it be? That's tax rate, commercial and tax levy. So the percent of the levy that is residential R/O, what's the O?
Open space.
Okay, which is 0 for most of the towns I saw, or the commercial industrial. Of those 17, 92.71% of the levy is residential and open space for Lunenburg, and you were asking about Millbury. 78.88% is residential and 21% commercial, whereas Lunenburg is 7% commercial.
Renee, do all 17 have a single tax rate, or do any of them have split tax rates for commercial?
They are all single tax rate, at least for what year was this? Whatever the most up to date, oh no, except for Littleton has a split. That's the
Yep,
only
that's
one.
kind of the one I was gonna go to. I thought,
Yeah, yeah. Littleton's the only one that has a split.
Renee, this is Tony. Um, one thing that is interesting about your numbers and the numbers that Heather sent, air is not in your list.
Right.
Is that because the revenue from business in air is significantly higher, you think? And correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but the list you had, air had something like $10 million in revenue from enterprise. And that was like way more than everybody else. Number one, do we know why that's the case? And number two, is that difference in your experience, Heather, enough to exclude them as a comp?
I think they were excluded on my first cut based on
Yes, yeah.
population.
You're,
No, based on population.
oh,
They
okay,
were
okay.
eliminated step one. Because I
Okay.
have a list of all the ones, there were 45 that came back. And air's not on there. Based on,
The population, 8,400.
yeah, so it's low.
I wouldn't call that substantially low compared to, I mean, we were just 10,000 not too long ago. So between 10 and 12, 8 and 12 is,
Yeah,
um,
the numbers are 2 years old now.
right.
So
So, yeah, remember, then fast growing community.
yeah, it actually, one of these graphs, it's the second highest percent increase in the past 10 years. Littleton's this the highest. And some towns actually got smaller. So I just did 10 to 15,000 thinking Lunenburg's at 12.
Yeah. Heather, do we know what is contributing to that really high, that $10 million number in air? Like, how are they generating that much money from businesses in a town that small without, I mean, Littleton, it seems like, I don't know, because I don't do the tax stuff, but it seems like, oh, they have a pretty thriving industrial and commercial base. But under that graph that you sent us, it looked like air had like $10 million in revenue from enterprises. What's the business in air that's helping generate that enormous tax base? Is it the railway? I know it.
No, that's a big business. I think that enterprise number relates to town enterprises and
Oh, okay. Oh,
CPA
geez.
funds. So it's
All right.
either, it could be CPA or they, I don't know if they have a light department. That's could be, it's maybe a large number. But I'd have to do more research on why that number.
So they're spending more than us, but have less people. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's just their enterprise. So we have sewer, water, public access, and solid waste under our enterprise. We don't have any CPA funds.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, what's CPF one?
Community Preservation Act.
Okay,
If you adopted that, you get matching funds where it's.
okay. It seems, I think, certified public accountant. When I get-
Yeah, no.
So do the CPA funds provide them with more money?
Yes. So
Uh,
less and less over the years, because that matching amount has become less and less over the years from the state, due to budgetary constraints, but yes, communities that adopt CPA, it's an additional tax to residents, and the state matches a certain percentage of those funds towards the
can you
historical
say what it say what it stands for again? Is this Community Protection Act of 1998?
preservation.
Okay. Okay. Whoops. There you go. Historically, why has Lunenburg not participated in the Community Preservation Act?
Believe it was brought forth once in my time here. And then it was right before the pandemic. And I think that was the budget, became very unknown that time and it was withdrawn. But it did come forth once before prior to me coming to Lunenburg. I believe it's not an appetite for an additional tax.
So I'm looking at the statute. It looks like there's the ability to levy up to a 3% real property tax. And then there is a 21.03% matching fund for the state of Massachusetts. How does that work?
The community preservation, we could spend probably our whole hour on this.
All right, no, not an hour. Like
And
two
there are only
sentences, how
33 minutes left.
yeah, 2 sentences. How does it work? And why have we not done it?
I think again, it comes down to, what the appetite of the community is for an additional tax and whether you want identified historical properties to preserve or recreation properties. So
It's essentially a matching tool, so whatever we raise and appropriate, the state reimburses just proportionate.
up to that percentage, it
Up to
used
the
to be, much higher than 20%, but now over time it's gotten less and less.
Okay. Sorry, Renee, I didn't mean to derail you on your explanation of your selections. Go ahead.
No, there's a whole bunch of plots in there. Some are just replicated from what's in the Westford report, and then there's some other ones. Ones that I found kind of interesting, are, let's see if I can. It's the last slide, the spending by function. And this is just, so Lunenburg's in red on each one. So general government across the top, then police and fire. Police is really low. This is a percent of the total budget. Fire is on the lower end. Public works on the lower. Education's in the middle. Debt service is the top.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't know what that means. I just know it's at the top.
Debt as a percentage of our operating budget
Yeah.
is high, and that's always been part of my budget presentations. That's something that are, when you look at, you're going to go out to bond the percentage of debt capacity, your total.
So that's how much debt you can take on, not how much debt you have.
If it's the percentage, I think our percentage is around 10. Somewhere.
What's
In
on
the
this
report
side?
I had a couple of years ago. That's in one of my tabs.
Yeah, it's about 10, it's maybe 11% roughly, and from this data. Which I don't know what year's from.
So they want to
Okay.
see a much lower percentage when you're,
Okay, so that's a good thing. As you're saying.
no.
No.
It's I'd say if you're looking at financial indicators, it's a weakness on our part. And that's why I've steered away from borrowing and trying to fund things through reserves and stabilization accounts.
So we don't want to be all the way to the right on that plot. These are FY22 numbers. So I don't know, honestly, if this is helpful or not based on the towns that are on the list, but these are wicked easy to generate. So I can filter out other towns if we want to adjust the list at all.
How's your list compared to the school list?
I
To
don't
the
know.
town list,
I'd some of these
no overlap.
Uxbridge, Tingsboro, I think have come up before with the school.
Sure. On the school list, we have, basically we used 3 DART comparison groups that were identified by Desi Ashburn and Westminster, Uxbridge and, let's see, and, I believe it was Air Shirley. And then we've also compared ourselves to the town, the local neighboring towns that we're finding. They're more competitive wages, and so they're becoming more and more attractive to staff. Those towns are Wachusett, Shrewsbury, Ayer Shirley, Groton, Dunstable, Shover Regional, Hudson, and Maynard. So they're in local distance, and so part of what we're seeing in our data is that employee retention is becoming a little bit more challenging for administrators and then for teachers. And also just all, attracting, whether it's attracting support staff, whether it's attracting educators, ranging from the teachers to paraprofessionals to administrators and beyond, or just also to support staff, which is inclusive of food services, bus drivers, and custodians. So we looked at that as part of our, our presentation. So it's very interesting. altogether.
I think it's somewhat to be expected that the town and school comps are a little different.
Yes,
I think that's
yeah,
what Westford saw too.
sure.
And there's some overlap. Maynard got eliminated from my list. I forget one of the reasons.
Yeah.
When we were looking at these comps for other purposes, one of the things that made it really hard that the town doesn't use as comps is places that have regional school districts. Not only do they get the benefit of having multiple towns funding them, but they have different funding rules. So there are things like busing that regional school districts get funds from the state that local towns with singular school districts can't use. And so it's really not an apples to apples comparison when you take regional school districts, even if the towns are comps for our town, because the regional school districts have so much of a financial advantage.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that Dr. Burnham and Dr. Gilson taught me while we were looking at this information this week. So I think that, and Dr. Burnham and Dr. Gilson, correct me if that's not the reason why these are different.
Yeah, I would say that it depends on, how we want to move forward as a committee, and are we looking to have a list of the same communities for school analysis and town analysis? Do we want to eliminate regionals? But that's mostly what's in this area.
In the whole state.
Mm.
I mean, there's very
Yes.
few, it seems.
Yeah.
Essentially competition.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
That is
you look that way or that way, it's
Yeah,
all
regional.
regionals. Ashburnham, Westminster, Air Shirley, Groton, Dunstable, Neshoba Regional, Wachusett.
Yeah,
They are all of our neighboring towns.
Harvard's like the only one that's close by that isn't.
Yep.
This-
And there were other comps, when the Department of Ed does their analysis, it's based more on similar numbers relative to student profile,
Right.
like your percentage of English language learners.
disability,
Right,
and learning.
right. So a lot of those comparable districts that the Department of Ed would tell us, again, they're out of this region. They might be down on the Cape. Right? So to do a lot of analysis based on markers that the Department of Ed has identified, I don't know that that's ultimately helpful for us.
I think you guys are a better judge of who the true comps are than Dart or whoever.
One thing I want to put out there is that when we were using these numbers before, if we included the regionals, we did terrible as a town in terms of pay and in terms of employee retention. And so I think that choosing the comps, especially on the school side, is largely going to shape the product that the budget task force produces. And so the question that I think we need to grapple with, and hopefully we can talk about it as we go along, is do we want to compare ourselves to towns that are most like us? Or do we want to compare ourselves to towns that are our competition for employees? And I think that while I see some principled reasons for doing the latter or the former, it doesn't really matter if we're losing employees to the latter, right? Like we're trying to fix a problem with the structure of funding in the town, which means we're trying to figure out a way to generate more revenue and retain people in town at competitive salaries without overburdening the citizens in terms of recommendations for new taxes. And if we exclude the regionals on the school side for comps, we're going to come out where we're a little below and sometimes in the middle of the pack, but never at the front. If we put in the regionals, we're going to come out always below the median or almost always below the median and sometimes at the back end. And so it will change how dire we think the funding problem is. But I think that the reality is, and the school people, we can talk about this more, but like if you don't have employees because they're going someplace else, because they're paying more, because they have different funding mechanisms from the state because they're regional, it doesn't really matter if the town is similar in other ways or dissimilar in other ways. If we're losing employees to those places, then I think that we've got to include them as comps, but it's going to really skew the numbers. I don't think that people in the town are going to like the results if we use regional school districts. But the reality is, I don't see any way around that because that's who's taking our employees. And, I would obviously defer to Dr. Gilson and Dr. Burnham if they had any other insights, but I just feel like if we don't include the regionals, even with the apples to oranges comparison, we're not going to really make any headway.
So we did some analysis on some of that. There is a slide deck in the folder. When you take a look at, we have teacher contracts, and it's pretty much a universal thing that there's a salary schedule that has columns that are based on education. So you have a bachelor's degree, you have a master's degree, you have credits in excess of a master's degree, so on up the chain. And then there are rows, and people are placed there, or they change rows based on years of experience. So we might hire a first-year teacher, never taught before, they have their master's degree, they're going on the master's column, step 1. But we also hire people who have experience, and they've either moved to this general area, it's a shorter commute for them, they're looking to come work in our schools. If you've been working for 20 years, you're not being put on step 1. So we give credit in terms of the steps based on people's experience. But when you take a look at the matrix as a whole, the very lowest possible salary placement, bachelor's degree step 1, and compare that to the other communities, only Maynard comes in lower than we are. And then when you look at the other end, because there's a notion that teachers on the higher end, more years experience, are really well paid. When you take a look at the salary schedule and you go all the way to the furthest education column and all the way to the max step that we have, that salary is the last, we're the lowest.
So is there a way to factor in how many teachers they have? Like, is Maynard small? I
Yep.
don't even know. You know what I mean? Is it because they can afford to pay teachers more because there's fewer of them?
We have the fewest number of teacher FTEs. Maynard has a few more.
These contracts are so easily available on the different town websites. What teachers or prospective teachers will do is they'll go to different towns and they'll look at the teachers' salary schedules. And they will apply based on the competitive wages that they see themselves getting. And so, I think, you know, what we are finding, or our challenge is that our turnover rate in administrators is high. And actually, it's among the ones that we compared. As you can access this, can you move it to, you know, the beginning?
Want to start way back at the first slide?
Maybe, or, yeah, at the first slide, because that really like capitalizes on the the problem that we're seeing. Like, you can access these salary sites, or on the town websites, and, we're finding we're really losing people, to the wages there. And, can maybe just quickly go through, and I'll try to highlight a key point or two, but, this slide that you can see, is really, it's, I'm gonna turn off the mute. I'm just gonna talk regularly, otherwise you get the echo.
But you know what? You can turn yours on and I'll turn mine.
Right. Oh, it's not gonna work for me. It's that echo that drives me crazy. But, anyway, you know, the towns that are in red are the dark comparison towns.
So those are the ones that the
those are
Department of Ed
ones- Yes.
has identified.
And if you look at, I mean, you know, one of the things that I see about the slide is that, our student with disability population is 14.9%, which means that amongst the comparison groupings, we're actually doing very well in, putting, dollars towards collaborative or out of district, tuitions. We're not spending a lot of money there. And, if you were to go on to the next slide, good. So anyway, so our goal ultimately is we're trying to provide the best possible education for Lunenburg students when we work with a budget that's both reasonable and realistic for the town residents. But the overall problem that keeps checking in is we're struggling to attract and retain high quality staff amidst the educator shortage. And support staff are also in short supply. We're finding it's presenting challenges in terms of what we're expecting for our substitutes, custodians, food service personnel, and bus drivers. And we continue to feel like we're being a little bit outpaced by other surrounding communities just because their salary schedules are higher. So, student data, I mean, this is Lunenburg with race and ethnicity in a nutshell. And, but yet somehow, we're doing very well with our MCAS scores. And Lunenburg students are meeting or exceeding proficiency in grades 3 through 8. 44% of our students are meeting or exceeding proficiency. So,
Can I ask a quick question about that data, just really quickly?
yes. Yes.
So does the data get down to the granular level of how well we're meeting our proficiency standards by the racial distribution as
Yes.
well? It does.
Yeah.
Okay. And how are we doing with the racial distribution within the proficiency score?
Typically what we see is not a big discrepancy with the racial subgroups. Our English language learner population, there's not a big discrepancy there either. The place that we see the disparity, it comes in with what they call the high needs students. High needs, and you can break this out further. High needs includes our English language learner population, our special ed population, and any students that would be identified in that economically disadvantaged group, low socioeconomic status. But we can take a look at each of those subgroups separately, and the one that we still have work to do, there is a lag with our special ed subgroup. There's a bigger gap. There's a bigger disparity there. So we definitely need to focus attention there. Now that we have a solid curriculum in place, and so on and so forth, we can now sort of shift gears a little bit and target a different subgroup.
Evan, I just wanted to add one quick comment, and this is something that I was not aware of until I joined school committee, which was the number of students that are in out-of-district placements in Lunenburg is comparatively low as a percentage of the student body, and they represent a substantial cost to the school district. And by keeping them low, we are going to have data that's different than other towns. So for example, I think, and Dr. Burnham and Dr. Gilson, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, because we keep so many kids in school, which is the ideal model for special education, we're educating more kids that would be out of district than other places. And so that's
Yes, true.
that's going to pull our numbers down in terms of achievement, but it's also going to A, save money for the town, and B, ultimately it's going to provide a better education for those kids. And so it's sort of a trade-off, right? There's no solutions, only trade-offs. This is a classic example where Juliana Hanscom has done great work to absolutely send out only the kids that we have no choice about sending out, but that reflects in our numbers. So it's you pay the piper one way or the other. But I think that based on what Juliana has told us, what other special education teachers have told us, that this trade-off is one that I think that we should be making, because like I said, it's what's best for the kids, and it happens to be more cost effective for the town.
Okay, thank you for the very in-depth information.
Susan, did you want to say any more about?
But look through, and I'll just, if I, so, I mean, beyond the growth scores, I think.
Yeah, so there are two different markers that the state reports on relative to MCAS testing. One of them is achievement and the other is growth. Because you may have some students who are not yet achieving at a higher rate, but their growth.
Meaning improvement.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think too, like with the things that we've done in terms of they're using high quality instruction materials, you know, having coaches work with the students, having a director of curriculum, which Dr. Burnham had added. I think we've been really strong in the growth area. I mean, the state is looking for typical growth to be between 40 and 60.
And we're bumping the limits on
Yeah.
the 60. So that's really
It's excellent.
good.
So it's good. All right. And now we can move on to how the accountability percentiles. I mean, the other thing we did was look at where every school is performing to like schools across the state in Massachusetts. So the high school, for example, is at 63%. And what that means is how well we are comparing with the other schools in the state. So the higher your number, the better a job you're doing.
Is that all high schools you're being
Yes,
compared against?
Massachusetts,
So like
Yes.
the preps, everything,
all
Public
Public.
schools in Massachusetts.
but includes, okay,
Right?
no matter the size.
No matter the size, and if you look at the middle school, I mean, their number's 70%.
Yeah, and actually the year prior to this data point, the number was higher.
Yeah,
We saw a little blip there
right.
with a decrease
Yeah.
for last year.
And I mean, the reason why there's no data for the primary school is they just don't take the MCAS.
Right.
They don't
Mm.
test.
Mm.
So, okay, now, again, looking at, how we're spending our money for pupil expenditure is the approximate cost that we have to work with to educate students in Lunenburg. The other, classifications that they make, at DESI are based on achievement, growth on the MCAS, high school completion rates, and other factors like chronic absenteeism and advanced coursework completion. And so, there are different markers of classification. But Lunenburg is, making substantial progress in all of these marker areas. So I find that interesting, so I feel like we're using our dollars wisely, for education purposes in the school system.
Right.
Is this forecasting out with the override factors in, or no?
These numbers here are
From
not,
2023.
right,
Okay,
it's similar to
Yeah.
you,
yeah.
going
yeah.
into the databases, they lag behind a little bit.
And this is all data that's in the public domain, and it's not anything secret, or data that's being hidden somewhere.
So can we tell how
Yeah.
much the override's gonna help? Will it bump us?
We can
We won't
figure
have
out,
the current for the other
Mhm.
comparative.
well, that's the thing, it won't be comparable.
So. Would be nice. And as we look at how, as we're looking across the state of Massachusetts, essentially, this is a graph that shows you Lunenburg is making substantial progress as part of their classification, along with, 37% of other schools throughout the state. And, there's a moderate classification. There's a limited no progress below us, in need of focused targeted support. And there are 3 school districts in need of broad comprehensive support. So,
Right, and there's only one category
Okay.
higher than where we're at.
Yeah.
And there are only 61 districts in the state that are at that level.
What do we know about those?
We'd have to look up which 61 they are and do all the
Do a little
analysis
bit.
for them,
Yeah.
so
You don't know, and like, do you know any off the top of your head? Which
I
ones?
don't, they don't report.
Well-
We'd have to go in and look at,
I'm just gonna say Hopkinton is probably in there. And I just know that because I live in Hopkinton, right?
typically your
High performance school districts.
Newtons, Wellesley,
Yeah.
right?
Weston.
Tend to be the ones that
Yeah.
are higher.
Renee, one of the things that's striking when you look at those 61 schools or those 61 districts, and I haven't surveyed all of them, but I've looked at some of them, is their teacher pay schedules are substantially better than ours. And it's not to say that teacher pay is the end all and be all, but I think that what the town needs to realize and what we need to think about as we're going through this process is you get what you pay for. And, we as a town have gotten incredibly lucky for decades that we have had teachers who would constantly achieve in the top quartile, but be paid in the bottom quartile or the bottom half. And I think that as the job market has become more fluid, and as what Dr. Gilson said about the salaries being more available, if you could go to a school district where, you know, you have every resource you could possibly imagine, and you get paid what you're worth. And, you know, the students are the highest achieving students in the state. It's hard to say why you would go to a different town. And, you know, and the reason I'm making this comment is largely because of what Mr. Passio said at our last public meeting, which was, you know, they'll stay here. And like, I think we have to come to a realization that the workforce is no longer so immobile. And as a result, if you could move or if you could go, you'll do that. It's a combination of people being willing to commute more, people being more versed in the information from other places, and then, you know, technology making it easier to do so. I think that without knowing exactly which 61 towns they are, my guess is that one of the facts that's most unusual about us is how low our pay is.
Yeah, I mean, we are never gonna be a Weston. a
No.
Lexington.
Oh, right.
I mean,
To
I mean-
indicate that.
And the other thing, so my nephew went to
Yeah.
Lexington School, public school, through high school. He's now 24, 5, I don't even know. The classrooms the class sizes were large when he was there. Larger than I'd
Most
say
schools
here.
have class sizes larger than ours.
And I think that might factor into the pay, like if I had to teach 30 something kids as opposed to 20 kids. Does that factor into the pay? It's a harder job, right, to teach a class 30 kids?
I think that people that are teachers right now don't necessarily care about the ease of the numbers.
The
of
class
students
size
in
isn't
the
important to
classes.
teachers?
Our teachers are very concerned about class size.
Yeah, I would think so.
Well, they are, but again, I guess I think that the dollar factor of the baseline salary.
I think that it's
is-
not a driver in terms of
Retention?
teachers choosing Lunenburg. Oh, it's fine that I'll make less money because I'm only gonna have 25
Yeah.
students in my room as opposed to 30. That's not a
That's
carrot. It's not a
really
carrot that
fair.
keeps our teachers here.
Right. That's that's right. That's right.
I was gonna say, would it make sense to target per pupil spending and have a target where we could reach it and then work backwards?
Maybe.
That would try to factor in salary.
The other thing, I've brought this up in the past with Carol, and I think I mentioned to you last time. Is there an appetite for regionalization here? It never went to town. I'm talking to Carol, the school committee at that time never brought it forward when Aaron Shirley.
Would we regionalize with though?
I think it would have to be Aaron Shirley. And they would have to agree, we would I mean, there's a lot of
Right.
ifs, but is there any appetite is it even worth exploring because there is a path to do it?
And how does that work with our massive loans that we have on the high school on?
I don't know. And it's not something that can happen overnight. It would be a few years, I think, to do, but that was never, my understanding is it was never brought before town. That
I thought there was a feasibility study.
it never went to a town voter. I don't even think school committee, but I don't know.
I think it'd be as far as it went.
Renee, I think that the answer, if you're on school committee, you have a fiduciary duty to ensure whatever's best for student achievement. I think the answer should be yes. I think we should think about it. I think one of the problems that you face is unless you're doing it when the towns are regionalizing, you're always going to have a hard time joining. Like
Yes.
it's not just a matter of money, it's a matter of timing. And like, you know, there's a whole bunch of concerns. I drive through Hollis every day to work, and it's 24 years, 22 years later, and I still have lots and lots of people complaining about the Hollis Brookline regionalization. And so I think that regionalization is something that we absolutely should be exploring, but I don't think it's something that's going to offer a solution in the next Like, I don't think we could get it done in 5 years. I don't know what would happen
you
with the
mean 5?
buildings.
I mean, I don't know what it would look like today. Like, what would it even look like today?
I mean, I think Dr. Burnham and Dr. Gilson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we'd have to approach an already, I mean, there's no towns left to regionalize with around
I
us.
know. Because Harvard
so-
will never regionalize.
And so we would have to go to a place that's already regionalized.
Yeah.
And then my understanding of the process is that their school committee in town would have to approve it.
Yes.
And our school committee in town would have to approve it. And it would have to all be approved in roughly the same time span, because, you know, if it's like 2 years later, they're like, oh, we got to vote again. So it's not a process that happens overnight, and it would require significant coordination. And then we would have the same problem we have elsewhere in town, which is we would have buildings that are expensive that we are not using. I think that, like, even if it was just regionalization of high school, you know, that building, it'd be, I think that this is going to be flipped, but I think that regionalization as an option, as a feasible option, set sail when they built the new high school. It's so much money and it's so complicated, and we'd have this giant, you know, albatross around the town's neck because of the building, and we wouldn't be using it, or we'd be using it for high school, or middle school, and, you know, some other kids. I mean, or we'd move everybody into one building. I mean, it's just, there's so many problems that we'd have to fix on the town side that I don't know if the regionalization would save money, but I think we should absolutely look at it. I mean, if it improves student achievement, that's what we need to do.
Don't
If
we
the
lose
building
the,
is no longer used as a school, that impacts your MSBA.
Yeah.
you beat me to it,
that
Dr.
building.
Burnham. Exactly where I was going with it.
Like-minded.
But could you possibly regionalize, like other grades besides, like we're looking very soon to look at Turkey Hill. That we're gonna need to,
So if we regionalize, we probably are not regionalizing just the high school. Because then I'm not sure what the benefit would be, because then you have your contribution that you would have to provide to the regionalized high school, and you would then still have all of your budget issues for K-8.
I don't know, it's a possibility. I know my school district where I live, the high schools is one high school and junior high for the 5
Yep.
towns, but the elementary schools,
Stayed.
each town has their
Yep.
own elementary school.
And there are
it's
different
a
ways to
separate
look at that.
appropriation.
Where it's, there's the regionalized school, and you've got a superintendent for the regionalized school grades. But then you have superintendents in each of the other
Yes, you
areas,
do.
so,
And then you run
I
into
don't
a
know.
problem
right.
Where nobody knows which superintendent is the boss.
Decentralization.
And they're trying to collaborate and, you know, ultimately, and I did come from that district previously. And I'm very familiar
regionalized,
with
yeah.
the challenges and, the successes at the same time. I actually am quite curious if we could, we're in the process of really continuing to look at this salary problem. And I would be very curious to evaluate what we see as the basically breakpoint, like what percentage increase would we need to succeed in retaining more of the administration and retaining more of the teachers, because the percentage for retention this year for administrators and for teachers. Do you want to go to that slide? You know, it just, if you're looking at retaining retention, I mean, Lunenburg, at principal retaining 60%. You know, that is literally the lowest amongst all of our comp towns. And if you
That's
don't.
just the principals.
Assistant
Yeah,
principals
so-
and principals.
Yeah,
So how many-
principals, right.
People, that's
Eight.
that's 8, okay. So one number can
Yeah.
really
Yes, it
swing
could.
that a lot.
Yeah.
It's small and
Yeah. No, it sure can. However, the administration is like a factor in setting the school improvement plans to connect to the strategic district plan for achievement. And I think too, like the teacher retention rate, is, what we're seeing is we have a lot of teachers who, are now on the top step. They've maxed out on the salary schedule, but the ebb and flow of the teachers, the newer teachers entering the system, they're not, I mean, it's not significant. We gain some, and then we train some, and then they go somewhere else. So,
But one of those unfunded mandates that we have, we have to mentor any new teachers in the first 3 years of their career in the field. I also have to mentor all of the new administrators. When we have a revolving door of assistant principals coming and going, every year I'm spending money to hire a mentor for the administrator. So
it's really looking at, what talent, what are the wage thresholds that will allow us to recruit a little higher talent base and sustain that higher talent base. I think, so I certainly would like to evaluate that perspective and see what increase ultimately it would mean for the education side of the budget, and evaluate that very carefully, because that increase might be much more worthwhile than moving towards a regionalization study, which may or may not, is probably going to take many years to get to that outcome, I would think, based on the fact that the high school was just recently built.
I think going back to one of the
Yeah.
original things that Anthony brought up with like CTA, I look at that as, a possible revenue source that we could say as a recommendation, or regionalization as a possible expenditure savings. Looking back historically, we should try to learn why those things didn't progress, and remember what we could do differently, maybe not be part of our advisory recommendation. We're not going to solve a regionalization or sell the CPA in the amount of time that we're doing this. So going back to like concrete kind of short term.
We definitely need other sources of rent because we can't rely on the tax property. So,
I worry about just the draw of students as well, because I mean, I know for me, when I was shopping around for houses and towns to move to, Lunenburg was at the top of the list because it was outside of the 495 belt and because it had an excellent school system. Regionalization, while it certainly has its perks, I worry how that's going to affect the incoming students and how does that then affect the I worry it goes the opposite direction with what we're trying to do and what the school district has done over the last few years.
My
right, because
concern is,
to some extent you lose a little bit of control over the decision making that impacts your students from your town, because you're just one voice amongst other communities with a voice.
my concern about regionalization is, even if it ultimately would be best for Lunenburg student and their rate of achievement, it's not going to solve the problem we're facing today, which is I think it's pretty plain, it's a catastrophe in retention of talent. And so if it's a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, we've got to fix problems before we get there. I think that it should be something that we should think about, but I think that we need to fix the problems now. And like Dr. Gilson said, there might be a tipping point where we don't have to give up all local control via regionalization, but we can still retain the staff we need. And since we have to move towards retention of staff anyway, we should try to, solve the problem ahead of us with an eye towards other things in the future. But since we can do both at the same time, we should do that. I mean, I feel like overwhelmingly, that's what we got to do. I mean, if you're a parent who sent a kid to the primary school this year, you're realizing, and we were able to have Principal Squire swing over, but like there was a time where it was like no one was in administration at the primary school because Chad Adams left, the vice principal left, the social worker left. Dr. Burnham, who was the other person that left?
Our nurse will be out part of the year, and that's all the staff who are in the core office, and those are the staff that really get to know all of the families and the needs of the different families, the ins and outs of all of that. So potentially we were looking at starting the school year with no one in the office complex with any context, connection to families, history, nothing, which is why I moved a principal who had been with us for a year and did a really good job where she was, moved her over so that we could have some continuity, somebody from the district that understands the work that we've been doing, knows the families, knows the expectations of families, and the school committee as well.
So
I
Heather,
think
do
the
you,
town, yeah, I was gonna
have you
I mean,
noticed a
the
trend
town
in
and the
retention?
school face very similar issues. We've
Mhm.
had a lot of people, turnover in positions, department head level positions that we've had vacant. We haven't had a land use director since October.
Right.
It
And
took
it's-
some time to get a finance director.
And it's
principal
similar-
assessor. These are
Yes.
Right.
very important levels.
Well, some of that was retirement, like Karen retired.
Right,
But-
but there's less and less people
Yeah.
going into municipal. That's a key
Right.
problem everywhere.
Right,
So
there
it's
aren't
not-
people.
Right, there aren't people. I can't manufacture people for
Do you think-
positions. That's-
And the investment too amongst the
Mhm.
safety departments with, hires going to the academy. They come out of the academy, they work here for a couple of years, they go. You may be back to looking at,
They need to learn and how much.
Do we
Yep.
need to look at, like, when we chose the information to present today, it was asking ourselves continued questions, and like, when it became aware that the salary and compensation were barriers to people staying here, I started to wonder, maybe it's questions that, we're asking on the school side that could also be asked on the town side in terms of police, fire, what are we doing to retain our talent? To attract them and retain them. And what set of wages are we ultimately looking at? Because getting the contracts and the salary schedules of the different departments would be a very easy thing. I would think. And looking at what that might mean for the overall budget direction. I don't know, maybe it's a little bit simpler than that. Maybe it wouldn't break the bank. I'm just throwing that out there.
Heather, do you think retention's gotten worse over the last 7 years?
Yes.
Maybe
100%, yeah, I'm saying that.
You want to think about it for half a second?
100%. I think personally, I think after the pandemic or during the pandemic too, that's affected retaining people too. More people want a remote or hybrid position.
same for us.
And are, looking for something that.
See, in my sector, that's
Mhm.
changing. They're becoming more in person, like it's tightening up. I don't know. That'll-
Do you have that slide which has the different like budget amounts that the towns were spending? Like which towards got in?
Let me ask, have we done a salary study for the town?
We do salary studies for each of our units, and those are the ones, the towns I provided on the uses analysis.
But I mean, have we, Lunenburg in general has an onsite contract, they've done a study as a whole.
Not as a whole.
Do you know what I'm trying to say? That necessarily has,
Mhm.
there's a whole salary. To different towns.
For your
Yeah.
personnel committee.
Mhm.
So the salary administration plan, we did
Okay,
the salary.
That was just completed.
okay.
But it didn't include,
No.
So
So
not
I
the
don't know,
schools.
personnel
Right,
committee.
okay. So, anyway, on the screen, the budgets, I think one of the things that struck me too, was as you look at the different budgets, you know, and Lunenburg's budget has been a little bit of a challenge, and
These are the school budgets?
mhm.
and if we didn't get that override, we would be at the lowest end of this list. Now, obviously, Wachusett has a much bigger budget. They are a much bigger district.
And some of these are.
A lot of
Right.
them,
Yeah.
Regional schools.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, of course,
Mhm.
but
right, so that's the challenge, right? It's like, we know that we're not losing many people, particularly, like the custodial positions, the food service, the paraprofessionals, teachers. They aren't looking for jobs in Metro Boston. They're not looking to drive in just outside of Boston. They're looking to stay in the general region, which is why, again, the regional districts are on here. But then again, it's not a fair comparison. In many ways, it's not a fair comparison. But there just aren't enough town districts in the general area for us to take a look at. We can certainly dig into some data on some of the communities that are on your list.
I
And
don't
then
know if the
ultimately
lists
we
have to be
could-
the same though, right? I don't think the expectation is that they should be the same. I don't know.
There's so many factors.
There
There's so
are.
many.
yes, there are. But
Data.
ultimately, it's about telling what story to that we have. Or whether it's, and maybe it's the same story in the town, same story that the schools have as well.
I mean, I think the aid and the funding is a big. Did anything come out of last Friday's meeting with Rev Scarsdale?
Nothing,
No hope, no reason
actionable.
for hope.
I won't say there's no reason for hope.
Like busing
it
is a
depends.
big, right?
They would have to introduce legislation and get it passed to change anything about the way that's going.
So I didn't see anything that would be change.
Right.
I think it's
The
something
funding-
that's gonna
Formula,
involve, yeah.
Because
I've
districts like
been-
ours don't get as much help.
Right.
I mean, that's been
Yeah.
the,
Yes.
everyone's been
Right.
saying that and
Right.
I feel like we're not being heard.
right,
Heather, do you know who is getting our employees on the town side And do you guys conduct exit interviews as to why they're leaving?
We do, we conduct exit interviews with all our employees.
So like, what are the general themes? Is it like, I can get paid twice as much, or I can get paid 20% more, or whatever?
It's more pay usually. Some of the recent ones were towns that have much larger budgets. It's, if it's a DPW position, it's usually they can go work in a private company and make so much more than working as a equipment operator, heavy labor for DPW.
And we face the same challenges. So there are some specialized licenses. So for special ed, we have to have speech language pathologists. We have to have school adjustment counselors or school psychologists to do the testing. Those folks have to get a license for that field where they could hang out their own shingle, right? And service people and bill insurance for it, right? They get licensed by the state for that. But there's another license that they have to get in order to be able to practice in a school setting. We have a hard time finding applicants for those. We have gone the vast majority of the last school year without a speech language pathologist. What I think they're seeing is that they can go work for a consultant group and be contracted service to a school district and make more money and have more flexibility and better benefits than if they got hired in under the district's collective bargaining agreement. But it's costing us 2 or 3 times more money to contract a consultant to provide those services because we can't draw an employee to hire to deliver those
Even
services.
without having to pay benefits to a contract, it's still more money than having
Yeah.
an FTE, fully benefited FTE. It used to be cheaper for contract law things.
They can demand top dollar because there aren't too many of them. And if you don't want to pay their rates, that's okay, because there are other
And you
districts
can't
that
get it
will.
covered under insurance or something, the school has to put the whole bill.
Mhm.
So I think that we have talked on comps quite a bit. Does anybody feel like we need to talk on comps more? Or can we move on to the next topic?
I don't know do we decide what comps we want to use?
No, we did not.
Are we ready to decide what comps we want to use?
I think on the school side, I think that we have a good idea of what our comps are going to be. But I do think that we need to make sure the committee is aware and that the town is aware, assuming that somebody goes back and watches this. And if they are, hello, Mr. Passings.
He's probably out of
If-
the.
If we include regionals, it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be a financial bloodbath, right? Like, we are not going to have data that the town is going to want to hear. And I think that this is part of the reason why the parents activated and passed the override for the first override since, what was it, 1992? We're in a bad spot because of funding mechanisms for regional school districts and the fluidity of the labor market. We are just not retaining people and we're losing people at an unsustainable rate. And so I think we've got to include the regionals as comps because those are the places where our people are going. But if we do that, it's going to look bad. So is everyone okay with that?
I just had a question, like Anthony, you asked me about exit interviews. This, Siemens School does the same thing for reasons. It's always.
Yeah, largely, we don't have to even conduct exit interviews because in their letter of resignation, they explain thank you. It's been lovely being here. I've grown a lot. I've accepted, you know,
A higher salary.
Yeah. And that didn't used to be the top reason that people were leaving. People would leave for career advancement, right? I can be the department head, I can be an administrator, people having starting families and needing to be closer to the daycare and not having a 45-minute or an hour-long commute. You know, you're losing family time, so they look for something closer to home. You know, even just the cost of commuting for some people, right? The gas and all, wear and tear on the car. I found something closer to home. We used to hear that a lot. We did hear that even in the last couple of years. My dream job in my hometown just opened up. I applied. They offered it to me. Well, that's a true story. Like, it happens. We never used to hear. Well, no, because I'm gonna get a 25% increase in my pay.
Cost of living as
And
well.
over, you know,
Yeah,
over time, that's significant. Like if another district can pay you like 10 or 20,000 more a year, by the time 10 years is done, the 10 or 20,000 is that much more.
Yep.
Exponentially.
Yep.
I have two quick thoughts on it. One, looking at Weston's or Westford's list, they split it out for school and for town. They are not, as far as I know, regionalized, but they do include Acton, Roxborough, Groton, Dunstable. So they include some in theirs. They do include Acton on the town side, but they don't include Roxborough on the town side. So I think the more data we can have, the better. We can always nix the regional schools if we need to, but I think having them in there, I think it's almost critical to have it in there just to at least compare to. Otherwise, I don't think we're doing a fair comparison if we're not looking at everything equally at the start.
Renee, you've been quiet on the issue of including regionals. What do you think? Should we include them?
I think we have to, for a number of reasons. Some that you mentioned and some just because there's not enough non-regional even, just to, I mean, a practical thing, there's just not enough. I think I'd like to see some non-regional included on the list.
there are
Where it
several.
makes sense, yeah,
There are.
right, there are a couple.
Uxbridge.
I mean, I don't want to seek them out because like I don't, what's not, like Harvard's not regional, but I don't think that's,
We have Maynard,
comparison.
Uxbridge,
yeah, I mean.
Hudson, Shrewsbury.
Maynard fell off
It's
my
almost like
list
a
or something.
50-50 split
I forget what it
with
was.
regionals and non-regionals.
Ezekiel, you have been quiet all meeting. You're the money guy. Do you think we should include them on the list of comparables, even if it means that we deliver worse news than the town expects?
I think we absolutely should. Even if it's, to provide insight to who's looking at the report. They can see where we actually land in the area. I think, yeah,
Heather, what's your opinion? You've done this way more than all of us. So when you do comps for towns, what do you think about including the regionals?
I don't see an issue with including them. I think there should be a qualifier so people reading the report knows which ones are regional and which are standalone. Towns.
All right, so I think that we should, is there an action item? I don't think there's an action item required here.
I don't know if we need to finalize the town list. I don't know how do we do that?
I would say if there's feedback on any ones that are apparently should not be included, like start there with which ones should be disqualified.
If
I
we
think,
take the union of your list and my list.
Right.
I think that the inclusion of Fitchburg in terms of safety is radically out of step. I think that they're a fundamentally different town a larger town with
City.
many, yeah, I mean, many more issues than we have. And
That's
so,
why we didn't include them.
okay, I just wanted to, because it
On my
was on
note.
the list. Yeah,
It was on the union side and we did not.
okay.
I have to go, because I didn't have a chance to look at your list before.
Yeah.
That was the only one that stood out to me as like,
And there's overlap in the communities
Yeah.
that are part of the regional school districts on your list.
yes.
We could take a look at some of the others that are on the
Yeah,
list
good.
and pull information on them as well. And then we might make a different decision as a group, which communities stay on the list as comps for the schools too.
Evan, could you review my list? See what you think?
I absolutely can. I've been doing that basically this whole meeting. I think for the most part, your list looks almost exactly to what my list looked like, with the exception of one or two towns added or removed. So I think it's pretty much right where I was getting to as well.
Okay, and we should look at Heather's list to see which ones we're missing.
That one I haven't done yet, but I will do that
Yeah, I
as well.
haven't either. All right, so. I'll try to
All
do
right,
that.
so if we're okay with including the regionals, then I think on the school side, Dr. Burnham, Dr. Gilson, we're all set.
Yeah,
Oh, you're all set.
I think, like I
It's
said,
gonna be bad. It's only we're all set in the sense that we have a defined list. It's gonna be terrible, terrible. I'm
We-
telling
we
people right now,
absolutely-
terrible.
we absolutely can take a look at the list.
Yeah.
And there may be some communities that we could get some data on.
Only if
and-
you think it makes sense. Don't force fit a
Nope,
comp
that's
in
fine.
there.
No, fine.
Because there's probably only a handful that aren't in some way, shape, or form captured on the list that we have already.
Yeah.
And Evan, I have all the spreadsheets in the Google Drive. There's 2 files, if you haven't seen them.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been in there yet. I have to get in there.
All right, so the next thing that we're gonna talk about for new business is the meeting schedule. So I sent Renee and Evan a meeting schedule. I also sent it to Dr. Burnham, Dr. Gelson, and I put it in the, Dr. Burnham, did you put it or did I put it in the main file?
That's a good question.
I forget. Anyway, it's in the Google Doc or the Google Drive for the Budget Task Force. And it sets out a schedule for the meetings along with the thing that we are going to talk about that meeting. Basically, it's a meeting every week except for Labor Day, and then one flex meeting on December 2nd, which would be our 11th meeting. The idea would be to have it as 2 phases, the info gathering phase and then the recommendation generation phase. And that the ideal would be that even if we don't have something to put on a warrant for town meeting in November, that we at least do like a 2-second presentation at town meeting. This is what you should look for in May. These are the things that we're talking about. And then we would have the ability to get some feedback after that. And we'd have a flex meeting and then we'd finalize our recommendations. So we would have essentially 3 meetings after town meeting, special town meeting in November, to get something concrete to all of the relevant committees. I generated this bit looking at the calendar and trying to think through what we need to do. But this is just like a draft. Whatever anybody else wants to put forward. I am definitely not the planner of meetings type. So this is like as detailed as I could possibly do it. And so I understand that there will be limitations. Dr. Burnham, is there any way you could screen share it? I don't know why.
Is it in tonight's folder?
Yeah, I'm not seeing this.
I just dropped it in.
I got it by email.
And the meeting for next week the idea is to have some sense of what are our obligatory costs, meaning something that we are mandated by law to do, something that we are mandated by contract to do, and sort those out. Then essential costs, things that we do because we're a municipality and they are necessary for the function of a municipality. And then things that are discretionary spending. And we can make sure that we have this both on the town side and the school side. And we talked about this at the first meeting, but generally, I want to do this so that we have some sense of what it is that we can not get away from paying, right? Like if, like the obligation of the school district to provide a free, appropriate public education is based on a 1972 US Supreme Court case, and it's tied into all sorts of disability legislation that went before Congress. And so we have a pretty strict list of things that as a school district, we cannot not pay. And I don't know what the town's list of things looks like. So that would be something that would, I think, help everybody figure out what we're starting with in terms of costs.
Non-discretionary?
Obligatory.
Well, so the idea is that like there are certain things that are
Um,
there are certain things
Every
that we
year in my
don't.
presentation, I use non-discretionary, less discretionary terms associated, so Worcester County Regional Retirement Assessment, your debt, your health insurance, your insurances, those are all.
Yeah, so what's the difference between obligatory and essential?
So essential are things like a police department. You do not have to have a police department by law. A town cannot.
Okay.
You don't. I mean, you could have, like I practice in New Hampshire, and probably, I don't know, at least a third, maybe a half of the towns that exist in New Hampshire, they don't have a police department. They have dispatch from the local state police. And Lunenburg doesn't want to do that, but that means that cost is not obligatory. We are not obligated by law or contract to pay for it.
Well, we have contracts, right?
Right.
Sure, we have contracts with them, but the contract ends in 3 years by law. So we could say in the next 3 years, we're gonna join some regional, dispatch from Winchendon or whatever. And those are things that
You're not picking on Chief Gamble right now.
I'm not picking on anybody. You just asked me the question. I want to give you an answer.
I don't think I could stand up before the town and say we're gonna do away with police for 5 minutes. Yeah.
I don't think we can either, which is why I said that they're essential. But the reality is, if we don't do them, we can't be sued. If we do not provide a free, appropriate public education, we can be sued. Since regionalization is not a possibility, the obligation to provide education as defined by the case law is something the municipality cannot get away from. You cannot send them to private school. You cannot not have a school. You have to do it. We have no choice.
Right.
And so I
Like
think that
we're
that's
not
the
educating K to 2 and we're
Yeah.
closing the primary
I mean,
school.
legally, we could get rid of police and fire, but practically, I don't.
correct, right? That's what I'm saying. Like I think that yeah.
Okay, there's there's a legal letter of the law, and then there's like reality.
Yep.
Like that.
Right. But
Okay.
one of the
Yeah.
reasons I broke it out this way instead of the normal way that municipalities do it is because one of the things that we have got to be mindful of when we're looking through the school budget is that special education is something that is very, very highly regulated. The parents that are special education parents are really invested and understand regulations. And so we have and we're going to see this, you're going to see a lot of money spent on special education, but it's because that's the one area where it's both most costly and obligatory. We cannot not do it. And the cost of not doing it would be a lawsuit that we'd pay for and lose, and then providing those fees. So it's a different beast. And I think that means that, when we're talking about money that we have or money that we don't have. It's because these sort of obligations supersede our ability to do away with them.
So is part of the discussion then to peel back to just, layers instead of building on what we already have?
I mean, this is my opinion. If we're going to truly do a reassessment of what the town's finances look like, we need to have an understanding of what is the like bare minimum we can get away with. In other words, what are the obligatory costs and the essential costs, non-discretionary costs associated with running a municipality? Fire, police, certain parts of the school district, and then go from there. But I think that, like, Heather, you and Renee and Ezekiel will probably know better. Like, is the requirement to pay into a the municipal employee's retirement, is that something that's mandated by the state? And if it is, then we have to keep that on the table. But I don't know another way of going about this that would be as, I mean, I just want to figure out how much money we have to send out the door. And if we don't have an understanding of why we're sending it out the door, if we just go back to the normal spreadsheets that we always do, I think that we're just going to get the same answers again. And so by choosing language that is different than the way municipal finance typically works, my hope is that we are going to get different information. Push hard, like push real hard.
I understand where you're coming from and that idea of, bringing it down to that level. I just think would take a lot more time than this group is going to have for this report. Because part of it is, areas I'm just looking at from town side and departments that we have where we know we're short staffed, we could use additional staff, and there's a number of mandates or let's take the assessors department right now. They're required to do a 5-year reval, required to inspect all properties in town every 10 years. So to put a number on that for salary expenses, I think that is going to be slightly subjective. I'm just picking on one small area, but
I think that everybody understands that budgets projecting into the future are estimates. But I think that if we don't have, and I don't know how much granularity people want, but I think we have to have some understanding of what we're going to buy, right? Like if you went to the grocery store and you're like, I know neither what is on my grocery list nor how much money I have to spend, the results of your grocery store trip are going to be bad. So I think that we have to have some idea of what we're going to spend in the coming years to get a better handle on how much we'll have elsewhere. So I don't know. I mean, I think that with the understanding that some of these things are going to be estimates, I think we need this stuff. If everybody disagrees, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise.
I think it might even be tricky on the school side because we're not keeping class size 25 or less based on a state regulation that requires us to do that. And there's no regulation on a max number of students in a classroom. So then it
Is that
gets
right?
tricky. How many of our teachers, I mean, they're essential if you want to keep class size the same as it is. They are still essential no matter what, but how many of them are essential really is driven by, how what's the comfort level of the community in terms of class size. And that's a big portion of our employees in the school department. I don't know, we'd really have to think about that. That's, it's complicated.
I think you're saying the same thing as, Heather was saying, because what level of services are you willing to forego in order
Right.
to function as a town, but it may end up disastrous.
So maybe it's like
This
we
is
could,
almost like a corporate mindset where you could cut Denver, move production to Seattle,
right,
and double shareholder profits, but then Seattle probably because they're
right.
maintaining. I'm just using that as an example.
It's good,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily about finding like essential education, it's more about the comprehensive education.
But what are the qualifiers and the parameters around that?
Right.
They're different
Right.
community to community as to what the community will accept, right? And it's just been for years that it's always been a priority and a goal to maintain the class size around the numbers that we have currently. In and around 25. Occasionally, numbers might go up to 26 or even 27 with a really big bubble class that comes through. But for the most part, we try to staff for that 25 in a classroom as sort of your cap. I mean, like as an example, by regulation, you have to have a special ed director,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
By regulation, we don't have to have a facility director,
Correct.
but it's, you know, somebody's gotta be looking after the care and maintenance of the buildings. So you have to have some staff that are paying attention to that, but I think that that's sort of the distinction, right? Like there are some things that we absolutely cannot cut because we are required by law to have certain things.
And the reason, again, going back to the reason I made the like 3 buckets up in my head was I don't think we can do a good job if we just go back to the same data we've had processed before, right? Like what's our discretionary, non-discretionary spending is defined by Lunenburg's municipalities, rules and regulations and traditions and norms. Like, I think that will just give us the same answers.
Right.
And if we're trying to get new answers, we got to look at the data in a new way. And so like, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Burnham, that like, do we assume that class sizes remain the same? Or like Heather's example about the assessors, you know, if there are no regulations, then maybe we just assume that the norms that we've had in place remain the same. But like, you know, I just did a quick search, and in Los Angeles County, there's a regulation that says class sizes are capped at 41 students. That would not be acceptable in Lunenburg. 41 students is as viable as cutting police and fire. That would be anarchy, especially in kindergarten and in first grade. So like, I get that would not work, but I think that we've got to rethink how we organize the numbers, or we're going to just, you know, we're doomed to Sisyphus's fate if we don't.
Is it possible that we're looking at 2 different projects then? We have this project that's due in 11 meetings, which doesn't have that ability to get to that level, but still needs to be looked at in a continuation of this process. Because I agree, I think nothing changes if we don't look at things differently, or if everything isn't on the table. And if we don't know what exists to put on the table, how are we supposed to look at it differently? But I don't see how that can be adequately done with the granularity that it needs to be done with in 11 meetings.
I mean, you've convinced me that I am wrong. If that's the case, if it's
Is
not
it
possible,
worthwhile at least identifying what is obligatory? Like
Without
not,
numbers,
no discretion
yeah, with
at
no
all,
numbers, yeah.
right?
just categories,
Right.
items, whatever. Is that
Is that
valuable?
possible, Heather?
This is Heather's last
My
meeting.
last meeting, I'm here for a weekend.
Everything's possible.
Days.
All right, well then the answer should be yes, because you can get this
Unless you
done.
want to stay.
I think that would be challenging.
Would you like to stay and consult
Given the-
until the end of
Yeah.
December?
Strengths as well, but.
I'm
Well,
hoping
then
that you join us.
Ezekiel, then the question turns to you. Is it possible?
It's possible, but
Department heads might have to tell you the things that are compliance issue, like they
Mhm.
have to do to be compliant.
To what level of detail, I mean.
Yeah, I know.
there's-
I'm thinking the stormwater, that MS, whatever it is, that compliance, MS4,
MS4 permit.
yeah, that. That's
a
like a little
category.
thing within DPW that's mandated by law, and we could be fined if we don't do it.
But if you look at finance, for example, I mean, there's a number of mandatory
Yeah.
things that are done throughout the year. That obviously carry an expense to them.
The expense, so the library keeps accreditation.
Right, that's a major, a large category.
Mhm.
Do we have to have a library?
yes. If we do.
Is it
By
mandated by,
Let's see.
Can be uncredited and then. It's not get.
is it mandated by law to have a library in a municipality?
It's a good question.
Yeah,
The answer is no, it is not.
yeah, I can't think of a
'Cause-
town that.
I think Belmont was gonna have to close theirs if the override didn't pass.
I think I wanted to say it.
I
But
would
that's
say the
what
library,
goes- how are your town residents gonna feel without a library?
right.
Yeah.
Like, I understand.
Mm.
I've worked in libraries 4 different times in my life. I love the library. And I think that having an accredited library, accreditation may be required, but not having a library is a viable option. And if we want to figure out what we have to spend, even if we don't get to the level of granularity that I had originally proposed and Evan convinced me was folly, I think we have to say, this is not a requirement.
But
Right?
is
Like,
it worth even calling that out if you know the town would go into
What's the
total
value?
upror
Right.
if it
oh,
came up,
it's,
you know?
yeah, I'm not
It'd be worth
imagining
going
that.
through the exercise.
Well, I think that what it will do is it will help us. Let's look at it from the opposite end. Whatever we do, people are going to be like, this is crazy. This is too much money. This is ridiculous. And then we can say to them, look, here is the problem. We have all of these things that we are obligated to provide. We have all of these things that are essential to being a municipality. And when we talk about discretionary spending, it is such a small fraction of what we do that we need to change the way in which we fund the town. And if we don't have some data to point to and show like we've really stripped back, I think that we might not get the same buy-in. You know, like going through the budget process with the school last year was a really bruising thing. And like, you know, we went through and got a bunch of different numbers a bunch of different times. And I think that part of the reason the override passed was because we convinced the town, at least a contingent of parents, that these cuts, if we went for the originally proposed number, were catastrophic. If we don't do something that's like that, even if it means that even if we're not actually contemplating cutting the library or fire or police, it will show the people that care that we really have thought of everything. And so I could be convinced I'm wrong, but I do think that we need to have some way of showing the town, like we took this seriously. We thought of everything, we put everything on the table. And if we don't do that, I think that at some point we're just rehashing what we've already done a bunch of different times on our own individual committees, and we're not going to get different answers.
Then what do you think about posing the questions to department heads?
I mean, I think they're gonna come back with, you know, a lot of questions on
What we're
what
going
level
to
of
do.
detail.
Yeah.
Because to me, the next question, if you're proposing these categories as a taxpayer, it'd be like, okay, what does that cost? What is having a, you know, requirement to have an MS4 permit cost? Like, what can we cut from that? Like, do we have to do X, Y, and Z related to that? That would be my question, if you given that type of information. But it certainly was.
I mean, like the MS4 example is a really good one because when you're a municipality, you view it as something you have to do and it's a fine. But having dealt with big companies that pollute lots, they just assume that it's a cost of doing business, they're going to pay the fines, right? Like they're going to pollute and the cost of pollution is a fine, and that's just built into their calculus. I don't think we can do that as a town. I think that opens us up to liability that's different. But I think that showing the people of the town that we have considered it on that level will help them take us more seriously when we make radical recommendations to change their tax rate, which I think that like, we got to be pretty candid. That's what's going to happen. At the end of the day, there's going to be something where we say people are going to have to pay more taxes, and no one's going to want to do that. And if we can say to them, this is the poison pill, we've considered everything, we've considered it in as strictly as necessary as possible way, and not in the typical, and I don't mean this to be mean to any of the people on here who are employees of the town, not in the typical town government kind of way, but we've really thought about it. You know, because like the people that are gonna, you know, respond with hue and cry aren't the people who voted for the override. It's gonna be the other people. And if we can say to them, look, we did a more thoroughgoing analysis and a different analysis than people typically do in municipalities, maybe we can win some of them over. I don't think we can win them all over because I think there's a contingent of people that like want to pay zero taxes. I'm from, you know, I work in New Hampshire. I know what that's like. But I think that if we don't do something different, the results are going to be the same. And the results are not working right now.
I think I'm struggling with the level of detail and the follow-on questions. Like, I just thought, does Bill need a town vehicle? That's not mandated by law. Is that a discretionary spend? I mean,
I think that would be, I mean, like
Yeah.
the snowplow would be like an essential thing that municipalities function as, they only function if this exists, but it's not obligated by law.
But how many snowplows?
Right.
Where do you draw the line with what
Yeah,
becomes?
how
a
it's
town
slippery
vehicle?
slope. It gets
How the
into
bus is
the-
gonna get to school,
Right.
the roads are plowed.
It
Right.
gets
Right,
into
right.
too much
Taking the
detail. I don't know how to draw the line or where to draw the line to still make it a valuable exercise.
That's a good point.
Now, I
But
would
the
go
exercise,
back to, every town meeting is what your taxpayers are voting for, what they want their community to look like. We go through comprehensive process during the budget, the development of the budget to see everyone, their questions, their input is welcomed. And I think we get to that point at town meeting where all those things have been fleshed out. So a lot of those concerns, or is this the right expenditure for the town? Can we look at it differently? That's already been discussed and hashed out.
I get that, but the problem is, Heather, that process is not working. Right? We are getting
Funding
people
mechanism
to,
is not
yeah.
working.
And it's
We
a
get
one
people,
year at a
It's a
time.
revenue issue more than anything.
Yeah.
Right.
right, but we're getting people to agree piecemeal on things at town meeting. And they're vetted and they go through the process. But the end result is this accretion of spending that is making the town face structural problems. And so, you know, like, I think that the ultimate test of whether that process is working is the fact that we had to convene a budget task force after passing an override. It's not working. And this isn't to put blame on any one person. It's just not working. Like, there's no way to argue that it's working if we had to pass an override to make the schools function.
But how many schools faced overrides this year?
A
So
lot
it's
of towns.
not, you know.
A lot.
Right.
And we were lucky. We had a group of really dedicated, smart parents that made it work.
It's-
Look, I could be convinced to not
spread
be so
phenomenally.
radical in the approach, but like, what we're doing ain't working. And if we want to try to fix it, we got to try to take a different approach.
And we have to fix it for more than 1 year.
Yeah, I agree.
So what if instead of having the essential and discretionary, we simply have the obligatory? We just look at what out of the budget that we vote on every spring, we say they're statutorily, or it's in the charter, or wherever you have it, where it's absolutely mandated that this position or this department or whatever filled, or you're not in compliance with X, Y, or Z, and you can list them off and put every you know, Mass General Law or every DESI requirement or whatever it is, and at least give a tally and say, this is the total number. So this is sort of you do not get away with spending any less than this, no matter what. You have to spend this. Otherwise, you're going to get hit with fines or whatever. You're going to get, you know, a drop in your credit rating, whatever it may be.
Or like in our case, if we get sued, right? Like the parents that win these special education lawsuits, their prize is they get what the law required, and the town has to pay the budget or has to pay the cost for the lawsuit. So it's like, it's worse than not doing it, right? Like, we're not just not saving money, we're actually spending money to violate the law. And I think that might be the way to go, to just say, like, what's our absolute minimum baseline? And like, the question about the library is illustrative. If the function that this part of town government is providing is not obligatory in and of itself, none of the requirements to maintain that part of town function can then be obligatory, right? So like, the library, if I was making the list, I would say, no, the library's accreditation does not count, because you don't have to have a library. And if you don't have to have a library, you don't need to have an accredited library. With an understanding that this is a really painful way to look at town government.
And
I
then
guess then that
what's
begs the question of what does that accomplish? And
Right, what's the
yes,
takeaway at
we
the
see
end?
that, and yes, we have those numbers, but what does that accomplish in terms of taking holistic approach to where we're spending? Are you saying, like, we have this, and then we also have, this is the differential between what we have to spend and what we have been historically raising and appropriating, and now we can kind of look within that raising that differential to say this is where the task force can do some work potentially.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's exactly
Okay.
right. That is exactly what I was envisioning. Because like Renee said this the last meeting, where she's like, I do this with my budget at home. Like, you know, like when you make your budget at home, you think to yourself, I like Netflix, but Netflix is not essential, nor is it obligatory. Whereas if you want to live at home, you got to pay your mortgage, right? And I think that we got to figure out, what are the things that are the town equivalent of a mortgage?
Is that doable? It's a lot more complicated.
It might be tough for the very next meeting. Could we
We
flip
could-
meeting 2 and meeting 3 objectives?
We could do that.
These are every 2 weeks, right, Tony?
Yeah.
'Cause you
No,
said
these are every, oh yeah, every 2 weeks. Yep.
Okay.
Evan
okay.
said
I didn't know if
there
you
were
misspoke
11.
or just misread. Okay.
no,
Just
they're,
want to make
they're
sure.
every week.
Okay.
So maybe the revenue one is easier, and we put the other one second or third in the third meeting. And again, like, if there's a better way, or if somebody has another way, I am happy to consider it.
How about we start with revenue and work our way back?
Okay.
We work with revenue, see what's coming in, you know, we look at tax levy, we look at, you know, other funding streams, grants, whatever, and work our way backwards. What's being spent on each? It might be, less monumental,
Okay,
so we can see what revenue streams we have, and, you know, we have a baseline. Just a thought.
That opportunity.
that seems like a better approach.
We'll do revenue.
Yeah. Does,
I again go back to the master plan.
sure.
In this process, really, I think that's a valuable component. That could tie into this. What is the town vision of where it wants to be in 10 years?
That is pie in the sky. I mean, no thought whatsoever to how you're gonna pay for it.
So certain revenue.
I mean,
I guess that's
right?
my last meeting. I said, what's the tolerance? of
Yeah.
it? Like, that's gotta be part of the discussion as well. This vision that tolerance level.
A reality
taxpayer.
check, yeah. So where does that fit in the schedule? That's later.
I
Yeah.
hate to say this, but I've always thought the master planning as like the town equivalent of like a Christmas list. It's like,
Yeah.
there's
Right.
so little structure and so little force to their decisions. It's like, I don't even know. So I put capital planning in there. If you want to put, if you want to slot master plan in there as well. I've always been sort of befuddled as to what the function, other than to like have an aspirational idea for the town. But like in terms of practical steps, I wasn't sure what was going on.
I think
It's
capital,
designed to be just a roadmap for the next 10, 20, 30 years that can then be presented to the select board and to the town itself to kind of say, okay, here you go. Here's what the town has decided, or a couple hundred residents of the town have decided that this is what we want to see Lunenburg become. We want to have more industrialization, or we want to have more commercial real estate, or whatever it may be in these little locations of town. Now go make that happen if it's the will of the people. And it's then to be taken up by other boards and other committees to say, that's a good idea. Let's run with that. Let's see how we can pay for that potentially, or, you know, what can we do to change these based on those ideas. But a lot of it is designed to be pie in the sky, because it is sort of what's your utopic version of Lunenburg, basically. Where do you want it to be if money wasn't an issue? But I believe if I remember the stats correctly, and Heather, correct me if I think you might have been there. The last master plan, we accomplished, I think, like 33% of what they recommended in total. So they did do some of it. The master plan, the pavement management plan came out of it. Depending upon how you feel about that one, it did come out of the last master plan. So there are some items that do kind of get picked up and rolled.
And there's
But
population projection.
Yeah, it's
that's contained to cover community grows and economic development. That would be a revenue stream.
are there documents somewhere? Is it
It
on the
should
website?
be on the website.
it is. Yeah, the old one is on the website right now. And the presentation that Jen Duffy gave, looking at the statistics of how much was actually started and finished, or there's no information on it whatsoever.
I was gonna say the capital planning committee's supposed to be putting together a plan, like a 5-year capital plan over the summer, so we may be
I
able
thought it
to,
was, yeah. So if we do it on
That-
no, if we have their meeting on September 30th, that would hopefully encompass whatever they were putting together.
I'm hoping that can just be a handoff and save us.
Okay, perfect. Does anybody have, and like, without getting into the specific, anybody have any disagreements with like the info gathering and then the recommendation generation steps. I mean, I know that they're gonna bleed into each other, but if we have like, we're just getting information and then let's try these things. It seems like that's what we're aiming to deliver to the other committees, right?
I think it makes sense.
Was it to the other committees or was it to the town as a whole to kind of say, we suggest you change these things on a large systemic level?
Yeah, so that was the conception that I had. It was we would first, do a small presentation with no vote at special town meeting, like 2 minutes. And then after that, get feedback and then finalize recommendations to the individual committees and issue an executive summary document. And that way we would accomplish both the objective of being transparent, putting the town on notice, but we'd also have something that's actionable from what we did, some fruit of our labor that could be used in other places.
Okay.
Mm,
Evan's moaning. I heard.
That wasn't me, that was Anthony.
that was me.
But-
Here's the other thing I just want to say. I have always had a job where I did not have to care about constituents. And so if I am like wrong-headed or abrasive, then that's because that's just how I've had to work for my entire life. So like if something comes up and it's like Renee, I hear the concerns you have about the library, and like we would never want to say to the town we're getting rid of the library. But if it ever gets too much, please tell me I'm being crazy, because I don't want to make this more difficult. But at the same time, I want to make things different. I don't want to make it difficult. I want to make them different.
Okay.
Sometimes different requires difficulty though.
Yeah, but
Therein lies the rub.
yeah, I know that my personality type is to be abrasive, so I'm aware of that. Does anybody have anything else you want to talk about in terms of like the meeting, the schedule?
Can we do this in 1 hour?
My hope is that we're gonna have a lot more homework over the next couple of days, and then we just do it as presentations. If we go over, that's fine, but I have learned from wise and experienced people that you set a goal, and if you miss it, it's okay.
But we're not all creating a revenue document at the same time, right?
No. That's right. That's right. So like sometimes we could have a presentation just from the town side or just from the school side. And then other times while that's going on, some of us could do homework to further other items on the agenda. Like I think that it's probably important for us to figure out where town stakeholders want to be, in terms of their salaries, but we probably doesn't make sense to wait until September 15th to do that. So I think that like the next meeting, because we're going to flip August 5th and August 19th, that would make it, a largely townside thing for revenue. Dr. Burnham, we generate some revenue, but it's like a vanishingly small amount of money, right?
Yeah, but we can list the things that we generate revenue from.
We
Okay.
can't find aid.
Are we calling cherry sheets
Yeah.
offsets to be revenue?
I don't know. What do you guys do on finance committee?
We listen to the town manager.
What does the town manager say?
If it's a reimbursement, right? It's not a revenue then.
It's a revenue to the town, but it's going towards the cost of what its intended purpose is, so,
And then more offset.
Yeah.
That's what they call
Right.
it, courtesy offset,
offset.
they offset costs.
Should we include those?
Should. Because they have.
Was a revenue
expenses-
source.
Yeah, they have expenses related to them,
Mhm.
but.
But technically, everything that we're appropriating is also offsetting a cost. I mean, the idea is to end the year, the end of the fiscal year with a null balance. So technically, I guess we would call it all revenue. If it comes in and has to go towards to pay for something, whether it's being reimbursed or coming in ahead of time.
That makes sense. As long as we can make sure that we track all of it, I think it's fine, right? Like this town and the school already do this. Like we have offset that we get for special education spending from the state of Massachusetts, but it follows the year after we make the expense. So like, as long as those two things are paired up, our cost and then their reimbursement, then we can kind of keep track of everything.
And I think we should look back historically a bit to try to forecast the trend.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
How far back?
Go back.
I
I
mean, I
think
like 10 years,
Because
but
of
that's
COVID, there's
a
that
long way.
weirdness, you know, in the 3 to 5 year time frame. So can we go back 10? Is that too
Yeah.
far?
Well,
I
that
have
makes
school
sense.
budgets back to 2009, so if we can go back that far with the town side.
Yeah, but that's the budget. I don't know that I can gather back 10 years of
Of
grant
revenue.
funds or fees were brought in. I can
Like, yeah,
take a look,
some
but I,
categories I can't go back that far, but other category maybe break them out. Like grants versus I don't even know what revenue streams you have. Yeah.
I mean, I know I included in the last budget presentation that we did.
Right.
The last maybe 4 or 5 years.
I mean, COVID really screwed everything up.
Mm.
Like there's a blip in, you know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's all the categories under miscellaneous receipts, local receipts. Fees, which includes fees,
I have some of that in here already.
but that should all be in. Here. The history of that. And actually it would be on DOR too. Back.
General fund revenue have broad categories. Oh, this is just FY23 for the different towns. Local receipts, state aid, tax levy, enterprise CPA funds, and other revenue. Then local revenue can be into all of these categories. So I have local revenue for Lunenburg down to back to 2010. FY.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years makes sense to me.
Does DESI have reimbursement funds on their website within their search history?
I don't think I've come across any financials on the department website.
And
Okay.
I've asked Juliana that exact same question, Evan, and she has to get the information.
I played around once. And I was able to get all past data. I don't even know if it was on the DESI website or the Mass, it might have been on mass.gov
Yep.
website. For all of the title expenditures. That went back to like 2002. Or 2001, so they had all of the different years of the
Right.
histories, but there's a lot more than just the title fund.
Right. Yeah, because recently we've had Department of Health grants and things
Sure,
like that.
sure,
Those
sure.
things might be harder
Yeah.
to track.
So everything that was like the Massachusetts government wrote the check for, I was able to find. But I think I don't even remember where I went to go to find that information. But it was I was thinking, I was trying to find the history on past grants I've written for the title grants. And so I'm like searching around and I actually,
State has open checkbook,
yeah,
So,
for that, I that must
probably
have been
fine.
there, yeah.
probably find revenue sent to the town there.
Yeah.
You just have to flip it through, so it's, yeah.
I probably never seen about every grant.
All right, so we'll try, I mean, I think from the council can go back 10 years.
Yeah, we'll do some digging and get as far back as we can.
All right, so the next meeting, we'll look at revenue. The meeting after that, we'll look at obligatory expenses only, as non-granular as we can get. And then we'll start getting information from different people. Is there anything else we should put on the agenda for next time or on the agenda in general?
I can't think of anything at the
But
moment.
I've been drafting the agenda as we sit here, so next time we'll take a look at a master revenue document. And we'll also do some digging, so that we can take a look at trends over the last 10-year
Mm.
period. And then any action items that come out of that meeting, we can discuss too, so.
So
Are all these
DLS,
Mondays?
Yes.
Tony, always.
They're all Mondays. Yeah, they're all Monday evenings.
so with DLS, you can get specifically, you can get into at least the, I guess, the general categories. They have chapter 70, school transportation, charter tuition reimbursement, school lunch, school choice, receiving tuition, and a couple other ones as well, back to FY 2011. So I don't know if that's all of them, if that would incorporate all of them, but at least there's those 5.
That's on DLS?
That's on DLS, yep.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it's just their cherry sheet estimates. So it includes, UGA's on there and the other ones as well, the on the town side, but it at least does, and the public libraries and whatnot, but it does at least include some of the school stuff.
All right, is there anything else for this meeting? All right, well, next meeting, we'll have the revenue document and then we'll go from there. And we'll make everybody mad by saying they're not essential. Blame me, that's fine. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Tony. Enjoy the rest of your vacation.
Yeah, I assume there's no public comments because there's no one else on.
There's no
There's
one.
no
on.
one else.
All right, excellent, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.